Hi everybody, I'm Polly, and in this video tutorial I'm going to demonstrate how to do a single crochet join for joining some crocheted squares together. This is something I do a lot of. I make a lot of afghan squares and granny squares, so I do a lot of joining of them. So what I'm going to show you today is the very easiest join I've ever found, and that's just a simple single crochet join. So here's what we've got. I've got 4 squares I want to join. I've got my 5.5mm crochet hook. I used this hook to make the squares. And I've got a 6mm crochet hook. This is just one size bigger than the hook I used to make the squares. So whatever hook size you use to make the squares, you're going to want a hook size larger. We're going to use this when we put an edge on the squares after we join them. Okay, and I've got some pale gray yarn. This is going to be my join color when we get to that. So these are my materials I'm going to use today. Let's get started. We're going to start by looking at how to join just 2 squares. So I'm going to take these 2 squares and set them aside for now. And we'll just focus on joining these 2 to begin. So the first thing I want you to know is that my crochet hook that I'm using is my 5.5mm. This is the same hook that I used to make these 2 squares. So I'm not sizing my hook up or down. For this join, I think that the same hook size is the best. You probably won't need to size your hook up at all. This join comes out really stretchy and really nice if you use just the same size. So let's start by putting a slip knot on our hook, and then we're going to take our 2 squares and we're going to put wrong sides together. So front of my green square is out, front of my periwinkle square is out, and now we're going to start joining them. The first thing we're going to do is take your hook with the slip knot on the hook and insert your hook into the chain 2 space of the front square and into the chain 2 corner space of the back square. Then pull up a loop and make a standing single crochet. So now my squares are already held together by that very first stitch. If you don't have a corner chain 2 space, maybe you have a double crochet here instead, so you have a center stitch right here where the chain 2 space would be for your corner stitch. All you would do is insert your hook under the top 2 loops of that corner stitch for both squares and do the standing single crochet that way. So I'm just putting one standing single crochet right in my chain 2 spaces. Now we're going to work across the side. So to do that, find the first stitch of the front square, insert your hook under the top 2 loops. Then look at the back square, find the stitch. Let me drop my yarn so you can see. Here's my very first stitch of the back square. So I'm going to insert my hook. After I insert it in the very first stitch of the front square, I'm going to insert my hook into the top 2 loops of the first stitch on the back square too. Then pull up a loop and make a single crochet. So I just single crocheted into both of those stitches together. It's that simple. Now we're going to do that all the way across the side. So under the top 2 loops of the next stitch in the front square, under the top 2 loops of the next stitch for the back square, kind of see it there. Pull up a loop and make a single crochet. And I'm just going to do that into each corresponding stitch all the way across. This join is really this simple. It's just making single crochets into 2 stitches at once all the way across the side of your squares. Okay, once you get to the next corner chain 2 space, just go ahead and single crochet into both chain 2 spaces like you did in the beginning, and that's it. Then you can fasten off your work. Grab some scissors. Then you can fasten off your work, and that is how you join just 2 squares with a single crochet. Here it is from the other side. Here it is from this angle. So you get this nice cool textury ridge right there like that. So that's how you join 2 squares. That's the basic part of this join. Now stay tuned, I'm going to show you how to join more squares and how to think about joining your overall blanket, and then we're going to talk about how to do the edge so that you can put a nice border on this. So we just learned how to join 2 squares with a single crochet join, which is really great. That's super helpful, but there's probably very few circumstances where you only want to join 2 pieces. I have 4 here, and this is what we're going to join by the end of this video tutorial. So let's talk about joining more, because you probably want to join even more than 4 pieces. A lot of Afghans have 12 squares, 24 squares, 30 squares, 48 squares. I've seen Afghans with over 100 squares. There are endless possibilities of how many squares you might want to join. So knowing how to join 2 is only so helpful. We need to know how to join all of them. So first thing I want to talk about is there's 2 different ways that you can use this join. So I have some diagrams here that we're going to draw on so that you can see there's 2 plans of action for this join. So I've got some colored markers here. Let's look at these joins. So the first thing you do is you lay out your squares and you figure out how you want them all laid out. So I have just a 12 square layout here, and I'm pretending I'm going to put 12 squares together. So what I'm thinking of doing is using the single crochet join, and there's 2 ways I can approach this. So the first way is to create some strips. So we would take what we already learned, joining 2 squares at a time, and we would join these 2 squares right here. Then we would join these 2 squares right here, and then we would join these 2 squares right here. And ultimately, those 4 squares would become a strip. Then we would join these 2 squares right here, and then these 2, and then these 2. So then these 4 squares would become a strip. And then we would do that down here too, so that we would have 3 strips of squares. This is a really, really easy way to do it, because you just do that, what we already learned, just joining 2 sides at a time. No big deal. Then, after we do that, we would come back in and we would do a join here all the way across like this, and then we would do a join here all the way across like this. So this is a really, really easy to manage plan, because you can keep your squares really lined up in these strips, and then you just join strips. So that one's really easy. That is the strip method. The other method would be, we have our 12 squares, and what we would do is we would join these 2, and then we would continue on and join these 2 with the same yarn, and then we would continue on and join these 2 with the same yarn. So they would not be joined right here until later. After that, we would come through and we would join these 2, then with the same yarn join these 2, then with the same yarn join these 2. Then we'd come through here and join these 2 all the way down like so. So these little sections are not joined for this one, and it can be a little bit off-putting at first, but this is actually my preferred method of joining squares. After you join these, then you would come back through and you would go the other way with one long join in this direction, and then another long join in this direction. So the benefits of each of these types of joins, this is my preferred one. I like it because you just do these long joins. You just go straight through without having to cut your yarn and weave in your ends. So this one has very few ends to weave in, but it can be a little bit difficult to handle when you're joining in one direction and the other direction isn't joined yet. This version where we do the strips, so we'd have these nice long strips. These are much easier to handle, but you're going to have a lot of ends to weave in. You're going to have an end here, an end here, 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 here. Each of these is going to be an end, and it's just a pain to weave in all those ends. So if you want to avoid those, go with the other version like this. But if this is too confusing, just, you know, deal with the ends, do the strips. It'll be a little bit easier. You'll just have a few more ends to weave in. So you can pick either of those methods. They are both perfectly fine. They're both perfectly valid. I don't really think one is better than the other. It's just which you prefer to do, what you like to do more. So go ahead and choose those. And I'm going to show you how to join using each of these methods now. Now, we've already learned how to join two squares with a single crochet join. Let's learn how to put them all together. So imagine we're doing the strip method that we just talked about, and we've joined our strips. These are my two strips. I'm just doing 4 squares, but you can do as many as you want with your strips. Just continue on. I'm going to line them up, so I made sure that my single crochets are going in that direction. So you see, if I turn this one around, my single crochets are going the wrong way. Plus, I want my layout to be like this with these two catty corners so they're not next to each other. So let's start by grabbing our working yarn, and let's put a slip knot on our hook, and we're going to start just like we would if we were only doing 2 squares. Ultimately, this is like joining 2 really long squares. What I really want to show you is how to join when you get to these corners. So let's take our strips, and we'll place our strips wrong side against wrong side. Then we'll start in the corner just like it was 2 squares with a standing single crochet in the corner space. And then we're going to single crochet into both loops of the corresponding stitches across the side, just like we already learned how to do. So let me just get across this side. Okay. Now I'm at the next corner chain 2 space of these 2 squares, so I'm going to make a single crochet into the chain 2 space. Now what I'm going to do is address the joins. What I like to do is I like to go in through the top of this very last stitch of my join. So in between the top 2 loops, not under both loops, but in between the top 2 loops and through the base of the stitch. Then I like to go through the other one the same way, but you kind of have to go from behind, so it's a little bit different. I'll go under, like through, sort of through the middle of these 2 loops, if I can find it. And then I'll come up through. It's a little bit harder on the back one. I'll come up through the middle of that back stitch. Then pull my loop through and make my single crochet. So I've just joined those 2 stitches by going through the top, then down through the bottom of the top stitch, and then up through the bottom through the top of the back stitch. Now I'll just go ahead and work the next 2 squares as I normally would. Just do my single crochet join across the next 2 squares, and then I'll show you how it looks. Okay, so I'm going to take that out later to show you the next join. Okay. So there you go, there's my single crochet join, and it went right across those 2, and it joined the 2 joins that we did just in sections. It brought them together nicely so they actually look like they go straight across. So that's how you join with the strip method. So you would just go ahead and join all your strips that way. Now let's take a look at how we can join our squares by doing one long join between squares in each direction. So let me grab my working yarn, and I'll start like always with a slip knot on my hook, and we're just going to take the first two squares, hold them wrong sides together, and join them like we normally would. Nothing special here. So I'll start and just work across the side. Okay, so there's my last stitch, and now I'm going to make a single crochet in the 2 corner chain 2 spaces just like normal, but instead of fastening off, what I'm going to do is chain 1, and I'm going to leave this like this while I go to my other 2 squares. I'm going to take these 2 squares and I'm going to place them wrong sides together, and now I'm going to just go ahead and start joining these. So I'm going to take my hook and my working yarn, and I'm going to just work right into the chain 2 spaces of the corners that I want to join in my next 2 squares. So I have that chain 1 between them now, and then I'll just continue working like normal down these squares. Okay, now I'm at the end, so I'll single crochet in those last chain 2 spaces. I'm going to fasten off, but if you had more squares, you would continue the same way. You'd make another chain 1 and then continue down the next set of squares. But that's all I have right now, so I'm going to fasten off. And now let's look at what we have. So we've got these 2 sets of squares with a chain 1 in the middle. If I open them up, they look like this. So you can see it's a little bit floppy. It can actually get twisted pretty easily. When you have a lot of squares going on here, these twists can happen, so you just have to be really careful that it doesn't get twisted all the way around and you don't notice that that chain space right there is all messed up. Okay, so I've got them here like this. They're nice and straight. It doesn't look like a lot to handle right now, but trust me, when you get a lot of these squares going, it can be a little bit crazy. So just be really careful about that twisting. And now I'll show you how to do the next side. So normally I would go in this direction for all of my squares if I had more going on. I only have 4 here, so not a big deal. So now I'm going to turn this, and what I'm going to do is take these squares and fold them in half so that the wrong sides are together and that chain 1 space is folded over the 2 squares, or over the 2 sets of squares. Wrong sides together. Okay, now I'll take my working yarn and my hook. Let me get some yarn going here. Okay, now let's put another slip knot on my hook, and we're going to join these. We're going to start just like we always would in the corner with a single crochet in the chain 2 space, in both chain 2 spaces of the 2 squares, and then we'll just work across the side like we normally would. Nothing special yet. I really just want to show you how to work across the corner joins. Okay, so when you get to the corner, I'll work into the chain 2 spaces like normal. Again, nothing special there. Now I'm at that chain 1 space. All I'm going to do is chain 1 and skip that chain 1 space and work into the chain 2 spaces of the next squares, and then just continue working down the sides of the next squares. So I just put a chain 1 space in there to space things out so it's not pulling at the corners of my squares. So let me get to the end of this and then we'll take a look at how that all plays out. Okay, so I'm at the end. I'll fasten off. Now let's open this up and take a look. So there we go. Our join went right across the previous join. The chain 1 space is just sitting right over that other chain 1 space, and it's really, really nice and neat. I really think that's an easy way to do it. It is a little hard when you've got just the one join going and the squares are all floppy and they just kind of want to go every which way. That's a little bit challenging, but if you're careful and you keep everything straight, I think this is my preferred method. Doing it in strips is perfectly fine too, but I just really like doing it this way. I really like the way that it looks here in the corners. It's really nice and neat, and it's really easy to just make that chain 1 space and go right over it. So that's how you do the long join with a single crochet. Next up, we're going to look at how to take care of our edges. Now what I want to show you is how I work across the edges with this join. This is something I think is neglected far too often. I think there should be much more instruction about how to work across a joined edge. So let's take a quick look at how we can do that on the edge of the single crochet join. So I'm going to pretend that we just want to put a round of single crochet on this piece that we've made. So I'm just going to start here, nowhere special. I'm just want to illustrate how, actually I'm going to start a little further back. I just want to illustrate how this goes. I'm going to start back here so we get a better idea of what the whole side looks like. And I'm just going to work basic single crochets. There's nothing special happening here right now. I just want to put an edge on here. So depending on if you're using a pattern or if you're maybe putting together a sampler afghan, you may or may not have instructions on how many stitches you need across the side. So I'm just going to kind of ignore that for now and assume that we're just going to put a basic round of single crochet on and we're going to worry about stitch counts later. Okay, so I'm going to single crochet in each of these stitches across my square. Okay, so I put a single crochet, chain 2 single crochet in the corner, nothing special, and then I just single crocheted in each stitch across this periwinkle colored square. Now what I'm going to do to address this join here, I'm going to single crochet in the chain 2 space of my square, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the top 2 loops of the very last single crochet and insert my hook under the top 2 loops of that single crochet join, the very last stitch, and then I'm going to pull up a loop and single crochet. Then I'll single crochet in the chain 2 space of the next square, and then I'll just go ahead and keep stitching my single crochets across the next square. Let me get across the square and then we'll take a look at how that all looks together. There's a corner. Okay. So this is how it will look after you've worked across that edge. See how nice and straight that comes out? So one of the things you have to worry about is how many stitches to put between your squares. When you do a single crochet join like this, I really like to put one in the corner chain space of my square, or the corner stitch if my square has a stitch for a corner. I like to put one in the single crochet join and then one in the next chain space of my next square, so that I have a nice, it's not pulled too tight. I don't like to skip that. I like to make sure I put a stitch right there in that join stitch. That helps with the width that's right here. That's why we have the chain 1 space to account for the width of the join. Gives us just a little more room. And see how nice and straight our stitches are up here? When you put your border on, it'll go on really smoothly. So that's how I like to work the edge of the single crochet join. So that's it. That's our single crochet join. Just real quickly, the reasons that you might want to use this join, it is really fast. You saw how fast I put together 2 different versions of these. It's really fast. It's really easy. The other thing is it feels really nice. Your squares are really stretchy. It doesn't take away from that. Sometimes when you put a join on, it can be a little bit tight and you lose some of the give between squares. This join is really stretchy and really comfortable. It feels really nice. It has this really nice ridge that can be really attractive if that's the look you're going for. A lot of people don't like the ridge. That's okay. That's their opinion. I really like it. I think it looks really nice. There's certain circumstances where I wouldn't want a ridge and I might choose a different join. But I think it's really nice, and especially like something like this with just solid color squares, something really simple. The ridge right there just adds a little bit of texture, a little something more to feel, and when you have a lot of them, it looks really cool. The only other thing I would recommend is, because this join is done stitch for stitch, you want your stitch count to be perfect. I don't recommend using a slip stitch to join my squares. So in here, Let me see if I can find a join. There's a join in here. I did an invisible join on these squares so that you can't see it. It also makes it really, really easy to match my stitches up because I'm never skipping that slip stitch join. So I highly recommend using an invisible join when you're using an invisible join to finish off your squares when you're using a single crochet join to join your squares. Sorry, lots of different joining words in there. Okay, so anyway, that is our single crochet join. I hope that this video was helpful for you. I hope that you give it a try because I think you'll really like it. I think you'll love how fast it is. I think you'll love how easy it is. It's just like crocheting, except that you're bringing pieces together and making a whole, and it's actually really kind of fun to do. So have fun with it. Try it out. Thanks again for watching.